Welcome back, everyone, for more Generation Analog, still day one. We are continuing our green discussions with our session on green environments. And to get us started off, we're going to have a discussion on what is an eco-revolutionary TTRPG, brought to us by Zoheb, Mashiur, and Annie Furlong-Muir. So please feel free to take it away.
There it is. Let's go to present. Right. Good evening to those who celebrate. Hello to everyone else. So this is what is an eco-revolutionary TTRPG? This is a concept that Annie and I debuted at Generation Analog last year, and we are developing further alongside two of my colleagues at UIT. So let's just get into it. So an eco-revolutionary TTRPG is what we're calling a kind of TTRPG that is at the intersection of two separate themes, ecology and revolution. We have seen that we have identified a trend towards ecological and revolutionary games within contemporary TTRPGs, and within those trends, we have noticed that there is a prominence of eco-revolutionary games. So we're also going to look at these games and present some reflections that we derive from having read and played some of them. So when we think about eco-revolutionary games, we're thinking through the lens of critical ecology. So critical ecology basically just the central idea is that ecological crises are the outcomes of social crises. So environmental degradation should be understood as downstream of imperialism, capitalism, and other extractivist forces. And when we want climate or environmental justice, we need to think of them as the outcome of transformations in socioeconomic relations. And this informs our thinking about three kinds of games: eco games, which are games that foreground nature, where the nerves and mechanics are about the interaction between players in the natural world; and revolutionary games, where the central experience is that of marginalization and oppression, and the narrative and mechanics is about social changes to correct these. And when you bring them together, we achieve like this sort of like synthesis category, eco-revolutionary games, which are about engaging with environmental crises politically, including the environment within political change, understanding humans as a part of the natural world with consequence and agency, and where the drive for liberty is not just for human beings, but also nature and the sort of coexistence of a sort of flourishing together. So we looked for these games within a corpus of games. We chose the No Ice in Minnesota bundle from this year on itch.io. I chose this because it is a large corpus of games, over 1,000 games, games modules, and other kinds of game-related content, all bundled together for a political cause. And we did a broad survey that didn't differentiate between these categories. So games and games modules all treated the same, weighted the same. And as part of the broad sort of like look that we did, we skimmed through each of the over 1,000 plus entries, itch.io pages, downloaded any that seemed like they were ecological or revolutionary, read through them lightly, categorized them as such if they still, passed muster. And if they were both ecological and revolutionary, we called them eco-revolutionary games. And we did this twice, first to select and then to refine our selection. So 1,042 games. That's what we had in total. We have some cover art from these games in the back. Oh, Axolotl with a gun, huh? So, um, about this within this 1,042 games, we saw that about 10% were ecological and 10% were revolutionary, which seems to be a significant number. And of course, like eco-revolutionary games, there were only 30 of them. So only 30 games were ecological and revolutionary at the same time. So that doesn't seem like very much, just 2.8%. But when we think about this in another way, we see that these 30 eco-revolutionary games were about 29% of all ecological games in the bundle and about 28% of all revolutionary games within the bundle. So within those particular trends towards ecological games and revolutionary games, eco-revolutionary games are have quite a large presence. They're quite significant. And we also thought it would be interesting to like look at when the games that were in the bundle were made. So the bundle ended early March 2026. That's why there's a sharp drop off in numbers there. But we do see that there is a huge sort of like a preponderance towards recent games. 2025, that's when most of the games came out, started in 2016. And we see that this line that trends up, like with more and more games included in the bundle being more recent, we see that the lines, the much smaller lines here for ecological, revolutionary, eco-revolutionary games also seem to follow the same pattern, which we can zoom in on and have a better look at without the total games. So we see that, yes, there's a little bit of waveringness, but overall, like it seems to trend up. So what we argue here is that the bundle skews towards newer entries. So in 2016, it started, but with just one entry. And most of them were in 2025 with 340 entries out of 1,040 plus. So newer independent tabletop role-playing games seem to show a consistent interest in ecological and revolutionary games. And within these trends, we see that there's a consistent presence of games that are eco-revolutionary. But of course, we did do, as we said, a broad survey and a broad categorization. But actually sitting with these games, reading them closely and playing them could lead to different categorizations. And then once we, even if we do categorize them, then the actual reflections that emerge from play could be quite different. So that's where we actually played these games. And Annie, I invite you to take over here.
Yes, thank you, Zoheb. So we built on our previous work of discussing evolutionary themes and identified three eco-revolutionary games, which we'd actually did last year. So we decided upon the Dagger Isles supplement to the released Blades in the Dark TTRPG, the fifth edition of Werewolf, the Apocalypse, as well as the Into the Odd Hack Ecomorphos. So how did we study them? Well, we studied them through a combination of close reading and play, as well as reflective play using the modified Gibbs reflective cycle. So this is something I've used personally in my own practice as a healthcare scientist and in education as well to structure learning from experiences and my continual professional development. So it's really useful to kind of digging into why we feel this way and what we believe is the cause of that. So to structure these, we began by setting up play sessions. So these sessions were played within by the two authors, myself and Zoheb. We set them up for a single session of play of around 4 to 5 hours. There were at least 4 players plus the GM, and we used module or available supplementation wherever possible. So our first game that we played was Werewolf the Apocalypse, 5th edition. So this focuses on eco-terrorist werewolves, as the title, harnessing their rage at a dying Earth, eking out a future in the apocalypse, in the climate apocalypse specifically. There's this kind of entwining of dense lore and mechanics to really sink your claws into to facilitate that play. And we used a module called Crude Earth, which was about small town Americana and an oil company buying up a bunch of land within it. So the GM found that the focus of the pre-generated characters for this convention scenario was the community ties between them all, and that this kind of community focus led to a certain internality of despair and decline, and their bonds giving in to the corrupting forces of entropy and the worm. And this small town Americana focus really zoomed in on economically deprived rather than ecologically afflicted Americana. And this tight focus and structure really reduced improvisation and amplification of the themes that we were interested in terms of the dying ecology of the world. That's kind of echoed in our players' experiences and reflections as well. So thinking about their excitement, they were initially excited for the themes of living through ecological death and the climate apocalypse, and they found that this module pinned the corruption on a single cause rather than an institution. They found it relatively unsatisfactory, and that the mechanical adeptness was really needed. There was this more political, community focused idea that they felt wasn't quite upheld by the initial reading of the game, and that they would have liked more time to have explored, or more mechanical adeptness, as previously mentioned, to really get to grips with what they were interested in. Interestingly, though, violence was really encouraged by both the game and the module, and just staring at the character sheet and looking at the cool picture of your werewolf. So if we move on to Eco-Mofos, this is an OSR style, so an old school Renaissance game of weird hope. So like other OSR games, it's asking for clever thinking and non-violent solutions. Violence is really treated with a lot of gravity, and this feeds into the prioritization of people and animals over power structures such as capitalism and militarist violence. So we played the module To Put Away a Sword, which will be on your left, which is about deactivating an Evangelion-style military weapon that was used to fight Gaia during the climate crisis and resulting apocalypse, termed as the climate emergency. So we had a GM, of course, and the GM found that the environmentalism was kind of more subtle. We saw this continuing post-apocalypse and survival in life beyond that climate emergency and death of all that we know and cherish at the moment. The module really focused on the trauma of that apocalypse and that foreword, looking back. And as we expected, and as I've mentioned previously, violence was heavily discouraged by both the game and the module itself. And funnily enough, tying into ecological crisis, we didn't have a player, we had a listener, because there is a heat wave in Europe at the moment. And they felt that the focus was on what the PCs loved and interacted with within their environment, why they had an impetus to defend it. And indeed, there was a bi-directional effect between the environment and the PCs, that the PCs were responsible for enacting change on the environment, and the environment enacted change on them as well. And there was this really interesting use of Mother Earth eco-activism, kind of this interesting segue and through line of thematic divine femininity of Mother Earth and Gaia, and then the masculine militaristic destruction of the God Soldier. So our third game was The Dagger Isles, which is a playtest document for the upcoming Dagger Isles supplement released in 2024. So this expands the post-apocalyptic steampunk of Duskfall and the original Blades in the Dark into a Southeast Asian milieu. We're looking at resistance of both nature and people against colonialism there. And this has kind of given rise to a deeper level of world-building complexity that really deepens and expands on Harper's original world. And what we did here was we adapted a starting situation about a nature ghost haunting a blood factory. So for this, the GM found that there was this really rich space for anti-colonial struggle with nature rather than apart from nature. The depiction of colonialism was really nuanced, that the people's identities were intersectional, and they had this complication with the imperials settling in their lands. And the supplement itself was particularly complicated and quite complex, with a lot of proper nouns used, and players tended to engage more with the areas that interested them specifically from a skim read rather than engaging with the supplement as a whole. So on the other hand, for the player themselves, they saw this kind of heavy consideration of environmental mastery in the imperial core colonists versus kind of a more imperial periphery coexistence with nature, mastership and domination of the environment versus coexistence within it. And that this was actually reflected in a lot of the playbook's mechanical abilities. So we're talking interacting with the environment and colonialism via plants and animals and spirits, using and existing within them. So overall, we're seeing that there's no particular style or format of game being eco-revolutionary, that eco-revolutionary games are very diverse in their treatment of violence. So we're seeing discouragement in eco-mofos, incentivization in werewolf, and then this middle ground in Dagger Isles, but the consequences of violence are still important. We're seeing modules and supplements as lens for play, affecting the themes presented to the players, and that eco-revolution therefore occurs from this complex interplay between the text, the preparation for play, and the play itself. That much like eco-revolution as an idea, it is a composite of play as well. So in conclusion then, we're seeing more and more indie TTRPGs are emerging with ecological and revolutionary themes with a growing number of games. We're seeing this great diversity in play, in style and thematic approaches to those themes, and that modules certainly have this affecting lens on it. And therefore, our key take-home message here is that we're creating eco-revolutionary themes at all levels, that they require interactions between the game's text, the module's text, and the supplements, the GM choosing which themes to present to the players as part of their preparation, and the players and the characters having the tools and the willingness to interact with those. And I will hand back over to Zoheb to tell you what we're planning on doing next with all of this.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So that's just the first stage of the study. We'll be studying one more game, Werewolves Revised Edition from 2000. Could be interesting to see what has changed until from there to the 5th edition. And we'll be looking at one more bundle, one other itch.io bundle, Amor por Valencia from 2025, which was bundled together for an ecological cause, Valencian flood relief. And we're going to be discussing the results of all of this at the Central and Eastern European Game Studies Conference in Warsaw in November. So here are our references. I want to pause here, but you can look it up. This is for the people on video, I think better. And yeah, thank you. Get in touch with us if you want. This will be here for posterity on video, and thank you very much. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Zoheb and Annie. This was really great. Yes, a wonderful round of applause. The hands and the hearts are coming. So if you have any thoughts or questions for Zoheb and Annie, throw them in the Q&A, and we'll kind of scoop back around after we've finished and gone through all of our different presenters. Up next, we have Michal Jutkiewicz, who's going to be presenting on the biopolitics of nature in Uwe Rosenberg's Atiwa. Yay! And we see a cute little bat.
Okay, so I hope I can be heard and everything is all right.
You are
So
all
let's
set.
start. As you can see, I'll be sharing my close reading of Uwe Rosenberg's Atiwa tonight. I'll be focusing on presenting this game from the lenses of Bruno Latour and biopolitics of Roberto Esposito mainly. So let's start with some disclaimers. Atiwa is a game by white German game designer, a very renowned German game designer, who decided to make a game about Ghana. And it is problematic in many ways. This game can be seen as continuing traditional colonialist tropes that can be seen in Eurogames to this day, unfortunately. It can be seen as silencing local voices, using local Ghanaian population and their practices to preach the northern global north towards the way they should be behaving. At the same time, it is exoticizing the way Ghana can be perceived. The designer himself decided to somehow defend himself. That's why he put a short booklet into the game in which he describes his intent and his reasoning. And he says that he uses Ghana to promote the global south and how important are local ways of treating environment and to reach the Western or global North audience with his game. So in my reading, I will try to use Uwe Rosenberg's intent, and still it is important to acknowledge the problematic nature of this game. So Atiwa is a game about, as I said, Ghana, about Atiwa region, which is in southern eastern part of Ghana. It is a game about fruit bats. It is a game about the way fruit bats are critical to local environment of Ghana and the way the local people living there are housing those bats for them to reforest the way, the land and the terrain. The game is a typical worker placement game that Uwe Rosenberg is known for. So we have our action spaces on the main board. We put our meeples there and we perform actions. What is interesting in this game is that it uses two kinds of workers. There are human workers, or the workers that are responsible for the main actions that are made during the game, but there are also bots. Bots can be sent after after the player's turn to do their own thing, eat fruits, and defecate. As a result, they contribute to reforesting of the player's tableau, of the terrain, and land around the people living there. So here we have very interesting way the bats are framed. They are a part of the environment, but also they are used, maybe not used, they are housed by people in a way creating a symbiotic relations where bats have a place to stay and are safe there, and people get more forests, more fruits, more wildlife inhabiting lands around them. So the game centers around cooperation between humans and fruit bats or non-humans. And this cooperation is based on keeping the agency of both humans and the fruit bats. Both of those agents in the game do their own thing, but they are connected by shared responsibility towards environment. So as we can see, the game tries to build something like a parliament of beings in Laturian sense, a democratic cooperation between humans and non-humans. And it uses biopolitics, which is typical to worker placement games, to do so. So the players are governing different kinds of lives in this game. The actions that the players are doing are responsible for managing the population of both people and non-humans, bats, but also goats or wild boars that live around the ecosystem, in the ecosystem. And the biopolitical aspect of the game is even more prominent when we consider feeding, which is a typical mechanic used in Uwe Rosenberg's game. After each round, the players have to feed their people using the resources that can be found on their land. The goats provide milk and also can be eaten. The fruits can be eaten. The wildlife can be hunted and can be eaten. Therefore, the players have to manage the population reasonably so that it won't be the population won't grow too quickly because failing to feed them means negative victory points at the end of the game. And as typical biopolitical way of thinking, we can see that this game uses the community, but the life here is not only human life, it is also the non-human life that is governed by the rules of the game. And as Roberto Esposito has been writing about biopolitics, biopolitics usually has two opposing factors influencing it. The way to build community and immunization. And as it is described by Esposito, immunization is the way to throw out the things that are unnecessary in the community, things that are perceived that are harming the community. In the game, those are humans. There are two kinds of families that live in our tableau. Ones are trained and ones are untrained. The trained ones know the importance of the bats in for the environment of the game. Therefore, they can house them, they can get into cooperation with the bats. The untrained ones, on the other hand, are the ones that are driven by capitalist greed, that want to get gold. Therefore, they are mining the land and they are destroying it. It is represented in the game by placing pollution tokens on the player's tableau. You can see one at the left corner of the player's tableau here. And the pollution cannot be removed during the course of the game. It destroys the land permanently. Therefore, those are the kind of peoples that the game tells us we don't want. We want the one who are aware of the environment and the importance of bats in the ecosystem. Therefore, this game is reframing relation between humans and animals, trying to show an assemblage of actors important to the environment and to the ecosystem. And this game has some more problematic aspects to it, but I don't have time to talk about them. So let's just leave it as a positive game about environmental awareness. Thank you very much. And here you've got my literature.
Whoops, there we go. Okay, sorry, my video wasn't coming on. Thank you so much, Michael. Yes, you came in well under time, but that's totally fine. We'll circle back, and you can be less positive if you want later. That's totally okay. All right, moving on. We have Gabrielle. Yes, sorry, I was just making sure I didn't I have everything printed off because I am as analog as possible when it comes to these things. All right. So next up we have Gabrielle Trépanier-Jobin, who is going to be talking to us about Play that matters, the role of the board game's materiality in shaping environmental messages. Take it away, Gabrielle.
Yes, can you hear me? Can you see my screen?
Yes, all of those things. You are good.
Great. Yes, so today I will present the results of a reception study that I conducted with two colleagues, Laura Iseux, La France Saint-Martin, and Simon Dor. As most of you know, board games that directly address the ecological crisis have surged in the past few years. And unlike the average entertainment board games, most of them are made of sustainable materials instead of polluting plastic components. That said, most of them still look like typical entertainment board games with their large and sturdy boards, their extensive glossy images, as well as their considerable amounts of components. Therefore, they adhere to most board games material standards except the use of plastic components and storage bags. If this maximalist materiality can enhance a board game's appeal, as mentioned Kalecha, it can also lead to semantic dissonance when a board game criticizes consumerism and promotes degrowth. To avoid this dissonance, when we developed an alternative board game about climate change called Detritus, our team limited its material components to one small box, a 7x's board, 19 cards, one wooden die, two booklets of 2 pages, and 65 tokens. As you can see, all this material is made of recycled craft cardboard, and instead of covering it with images, we use this substrate as a background and design the visual elements to fit its grainy texture and brown unbleached fibers. We also fabricated our own tokens with homemade air-dry clay composed of biodegradable ingredients written on the tokens card: baking soda, cornstarch, water, and food coloring. The goal of these drastic choices was not really to reduce the carbon, not only to reduce the carbon footprint of the game, but also and mostly to align its materiality with its message in favor of degrowth and social solutions, such as reducing meat consumption, circular economy, anti-pollution laws, vertical cities, etc. Indeed, Detritus' procedural rhetoric questions the blind faith in existing and imagined technologies to save the world from climate change by highlighting their interactions and risk. As members of a government, players must work together to decide which solution to implement in order to reduce pollution, weighting their costs and benefits, long-term risk, and interdependencies. Those who build a tech center to unlock and implement geoengineering solutions such as space mirrors, stratospheric aerosols, waste-eating bacteria, etc., have to roll a die at the end of the game to know if these solutions lead to negative consequences in the long term. Only social solutions turn out to be entirely predictable in the game. Now, at some point, we decided to use Detritus to study the influence of board games' materiality on the reception of their environmentalist message, and we got funds from Game and Lab to do so. For the purpose of this research, we created a polluting version of Detritus. And because it's the exact same games in terms of gameplay, the amount of components is unfortunately similar. We just added pages in the booklets and plastic bags to store the tokens. However, the booklets and cards are printed on glossy paper entirely covered of images, some purposely created with AI, as mentioned in the credits. The boxes, board, tokens, rounds counter, and technological center are all 3D printed with plastic filament. And our objective with this was to compare the reception of both versions to see if the game's materiality impact the player's strategy and choices, their appreciation, criticism of its materiality, their perception of its coherence, and their interpretation of the game's message. For our theoretical framework, we borrow concept from semiotics, this academic field that studies the process through which meaning is produced with signs, particularly the concept of multimodality, according to which diverse types of sign interact to shape meaning, including substrates. A substrate is the material, medium, physical surface upon which signs are inscribed, and according to Chumley, they play a crucial role in the shaping and transmission of signs, as well as the production and interpretation of meaning within a given semiotic system. We also borrowed the concept of modal consonance and modal dissonance. In consonant configuration, all modal components align to create a coherent, holistic message, while in dissonant configuration, it is the opposite. Dissonant configuration can have a negative impact if it's not intended, but it can also be used to draw attention to something, create humor, produce emotion, generate reflection, as is the case of the polluting version of detritus. Now, because we deliberately varied the game's materiality while keeping the rule and message relatively constant, this study has an experimental component. But because we collected data through focus groups and analyzed participants' interpretations, perception, and experiences, the study is qualitative. And because it's qualitative, the goal is to elaborate hypotheses and theories about the semantic function of board games' materiality instead of validating or invalidating hypotheses. 80 students in game design volunteered to participate, and they were separated in 4 groups. 2 groups played the polluting version, and 2 groups the eco-friendly version in teams of 4 to 5 players. And following the play session, the participants were asked open-ended questions about their strategies, appreciation of the game, perception of its message, and ultimately perception of its materiality and its coherence with the game's message. So after analyzing the data, we can conclude that the materiality of the game did not influence the prioritized strategy, the choice to build a technological center or not, the type of solutions implemented. As you can see, prioritized strategies were calculating the cost efficiency of many solutions, saving money, using the same resources from different solutions, and avoiding the extraction of resources in the same proportion in both groups. And interestingly, none of the teams tried to anticipate the long-term effects of the solution by reading their description on the cards. The proportion of teams who built a technological center and their reason to do so are similar in both groups, and the proportion of teams who did not build a technological center and their reason to do so as well. The only difference between the 2 groups is that only teams who played the polluting version were concerned about the amount of detritus generated by the tech center, perhaps because its 3-dimensionality made it more obvious that it would destroy a forest and generate pollution. Interestingly, none of the teams hesitated to refuse to build a tech center because the geoengineering solutions it unlocks seems risky. All teams mix the 3 types of solutions, regardless the version they played, even when they built a tech center. The results that we can draw from this analysis is that the materiality of the game did not influence the level of appreciation and criticism of its materiality, the interpretation of its procedural rhetoric, and the perception of social and technological solution to climate change. However, it did influence the reasons why the materiality was appreciated, the reason why it was criticized, and the perception of its coherence with the game's message. The materiality of both versions were highly appreciated, but for different reasons. Before being asked about the materiality of the game during the focus group, teams who played the eco-friendly version praised its eco-friendly craft cardboard, its biodegradable tokens, its limited quantity of material, and the absence of plastic, while teams who played the polluting version praised its originality, its cute tactile and well-conceived 3D printed material. One team supposed that it was made of recycled material, 2 teams praised its minimalism, and 2 other teams its marketability. After being asked about the game's materiality, the teams from both groups repeated the same compliment. The materiality of both versions were slightly criticized, but not for the same reasons. The teams who played the eco-friendly version criticized its small size, its fragility, the legibility of the writing, and the stickiness of the detritus token, while only one team who played the polluting version criticized the presence of non-recycled plastic. Other noted the absence of cardboard that, however, makes the game more sturdy, the polluting materiality of the 3D print tech center, and the use of AI for illustrations. That's an interesting finding. So there's 9 people from 3 different teams that actually complain about the use of AI for illustrating the booklets. Probably the fact that there are students in game design that AI is kind of compromising their career played a role in that results. After being asked about the material of the game, the criticism of those who played the eco-friendly version remained the same. While only 7 persons from half of the teams who played with the polluting version criticized its plastic component and not the plastic storage bag. Other noted its lack of minimalism, the corporate style of the box, the production cost, and the use of AI for illustrations. Now, before being asked about the game's materiality, 18 people from 6 different teams acknowledged the coherence of the eco-friendly version and the game's message. Nobody from that group pointed inconsistencies between the game's materiality and message. While on the other side, nobody who played the polluting version mentioned the contradiction between the game's materiality and message. One person even said the dome shape of the 3D printed tech center connotes ecology. This is it. 6 people from 3 different teams, however, highlighted the irony of using AI to illustrate the ecological game. After being asked about the materiality of the game, 12 people from 5 teams who played the eco-friendly version reiterated the coherence of the game's materiality and message. Nobody pointed any inconsistencies, while nobody who played the polluting version mentioned clearly a dissonance between the game's materiality and its message. 12 people from 4 teams who played the polluting version even affirmed that the materiality of the game is coherent with its message. 2 people in one team specified that it was only coherent if the plastic is recycled, and 4 people from one team mentioned the incoherence of using AI to illustrate the game. The actualization of the intended message is similar in both groups. It goes from statements like life is unpredictable, all solutions have drawbacks, which does not really reflect the intended message, to statements that better encapsulate what we try to say with that game, such as we have to anticipate the consequences of our action, some solutions are riskier, and more clearly, geoengineering solutions are riskier and social solutions should be prioritized. The same can be said for their positive perception of social solution and negative perception of geoengineering after playing the game. It's pretty similar in both groups. Now, I'm still processing all these data, and I have much more data about this reception study, but here are some of the preliminary interpretations of the results. The fact that the game's materiality did not impact how its message was interpreted illustrates the efficiency of procedural rhetoric, as argued by Bogost in 2007. I myself been critical of how much Bogost was defending procedural rhetoric, but I think that we cannot deny the fact that it's pretty efficient by itself. The perceived coherence of the eco-friendly version suggests that the materiality of a board game supports its message more than it shapes the message, more than it can obscures the message. So the materiality of a board game plays kind of a supportive role in terms of conveying an environmental message. The influence of habits on the meaning attributed to signs, which is reinforced by the repetition of similar experiences, could explain the relative invisibility of the plastic components and the relative invisibility of its dissonance with the game's message. It can also explain the visibility of the biodegradable substrates and their consonance with the game's message. We established earlier that the board game industry was conditioned players to think that big boxes and intricate components lead to better and more valuable games. Can add to this that it normalized the use of plastic components and storage bags. Yet board games made of craft cardboards and air-dried clay are almost non-existent, so they subvert expectations. So are 3D printed boards and boxes, and that might explain why they were praised by our participants even before the discussion about materiality. And the use of AI is also quite new, which also explains why it was widely noticed and criticized. Finally, habits can also explain why nobody anticipated the risk of geoengineering solutions. In our capitalist society, we're conditioned to believe that technologies bring progress and solve problems. And as I concluded in a previous research, most board games about climate change praise technological solutions. So I'm out of time. I will stop here and to follow the project and eventually download the print and play version of Detritus, which should be available by the end of the summer. You can email me or visit my website.
Thank you sorry. Thank you so much, Gabrielle. Hadn't talked in a while. Yes, there's lots of applause, and your talk generated a ton of conversation in the Discord as well, and hopefully some of that will jump over into the chat here. And we have one more presentation, then we'll bring everybody back in to have a really great, I think a very good discussion. But yes, just a reminder to put questions in the Q&A. Or in the chat, I can grab them as long as I can see that it's a question. And last but not least, we have Kathleen, Morrissey, and Samin Tokey talking about acid green games, psychedelic solarpunk tripping toward ecological attunement. I love that title. I just really like the solarpunk and tripping. All right, so Kathleen, yes, awesome. I'm sorry, I was trying. There's so many little boxes, and I'm just trying to make sure I got everybody.
Awesome. Thank you for reading the clunker of a title we put
No,
together.
I like it. It's not a clunker at all. I love it.
Thank you. So hi, I'm Kathleen Morrissey. I'm a PhD student at WPI, and here's my co-presenter.
My name is Samin Tokey. I am also a PhD student at Worcester Polytechnic Institute.
And today we'll be discussing acid green games, which is a conceptual framework we're developing as we're trying to design a subversive solarpunk game.
Firstly, we're going to talk about what you're going to cover. Firstly, green gaming and the solarpunk idea, then why it's so hard to turn those ideas or values into a real game. Next, we're going to take a look at how powerful groups and companies can hijack green ideas and use them just for image, which is also known as greenwashing. Then we're going to introduce our ongoing game named Attune for You and show how we designed it to resist being co-opted. And finally, our process and where the project stands right now.
So green gaming refers to games that explore environmental issues and sustainability through themes, mechanics, and player interactions. These games can range from educational simulations to climate-focused narratives. And while such games have a promising pro-social impact, there are some areas worth exploring beyond their educational utility. Understandably, ecosystems are often reduced to resources, which is quite simplifying, and such games may not represent things like uncertainty and ecological agency, which may be supportive to more radical eco-political transformation. So there are existing examples of green gaming across both analog and digital spaces that explore ecological futures. Here's a case study for just 3 for the purposes of our pre-production research. Firstly is Terra Nil, which is a reverse city builder that asks players to optimize space for restoration rather than expansion. Then we have the Mariestad Climate Board game, which simulates collective decision-making to balance the interests of real-world stakeholders working towards carbon neutrality in a real city. And then we have Solarpunk, the game, kind of on the nose, that explores sustainable technologies in a Minecraft-like world. This particular example highlights the challenges of translating Solarpunk values, particularly in game systems. So together, these games illustrate that green game design is evolving in exciting directions. Acid Green Gaming builds on this foundation by asking how games might further emphasize ecological entanglements and more than human relationships. So in literary spaces, solarpunk is often referred to as a subgenre of cli-fi. However, its broader definition comes from a solarpunk manifesto and other collective places. It's sort of a speculative movement that goes beyond a genre, that imagines hopeful futures built through cooperation, sustainability, and alternative relationships between humans, technology, and environments. Here are some common themes that you can identify as identifiably solar punk, such as hopeful futures, living with nature, and the punk element kind of comes through with like DIY culture, counterculture, and sometimes post-capitalist and decolonial approaches. So for games, Solarpunk provides not only an aesthetic language of green vibes, robot-plant hybridities, or DIY renewable technologies, but it's also a set of values that can be translated into playful systems. So with that said, Solarpunk began as a radical imaginary that challenged extractive systems by envisioning decentralized, community-oriented futures. However, the displayed article here explains how social imaginaries like this can become subject to elite capture, where powerful institutions appropriate the aesthetics of a movement while removing its transformative politics. Solarpunk can be elite captured in three main ways. One, through aestheticization, where its visual language of green futures is adopted without its political critique. Second, through technological solutionism, where sustainability becomes reduced to technological fixes rather than systemic change. And finally, through commodification, where radical visions are transformed into marketable products, branding, and consumer lifestyles. So all three games from the earlier slide are nascent examples of these forms of elite capture. So Terra Nil in particular depicts advanced technology as the main way out of climate disaster without any real negotiating with community. Solarpunk, the game, depicts a single player in a Minecraft-like world without any real tensions or reorientations to the environment. However, its aesthetics are very committed to the Solarpunk palette. And the Mariestad Climate Board game was not built with Solarpunk in mind. In fact, the graphic artist who was commissioned to create the cards for the game imagined locations in Sweden through a Solarpunk perspective and applied it to the game after the fact. So while the game was definitely made by sincere parties, it does show how simple it is to apply Solarpunk to things like climate neutrality. And climate neutrality is simply reaching a state of neutrality does not sufficiently mitigate the worst impacts of climate change, and solarpunk as a genre would beckon us to sort of dream a bit more utopian. So from there, we've identified a bit of a gap in our pre-production research. Solarpunk is easy enough to evoke aesthetically in games, but some common patterns contrast with the movement's values. Survival crafting is a bit of a default genre when it comes to translating Solarpunk into gameful systems, and even its best example, such as the RPG Scraps, which is the DIY winner of the Solarpunk and Utopias Jam, leave open questions about uncertainty and negotiation. So resource gathering is still the primary path to progress in such games, and single human heroes or like a small group of human heroes are sort of presented as the ideal candidates to solve large-scale problems. Thus, we wanted to design for a deeper engagement with the solarpunk ideals, which we've listed here. So moving from extraction and optimization towards reciprocity and care, valuing small acts of connection, and designing futures through collaboration rather than highlighting individual achievement.
All right, so now we are going to talk about our game, which is called Attune for You. The main idea of Attune for You shifts from conventional solarpunk games that Kathleen was talking about in our previous slides. Instead of managing nature from above, in Attune for You, you become a part of it. Most games put human in charge of the environment, ours does not. Instead, it treats people as living inside an ecosystem, not ruling over them. We also move past the usual Solarpunk look and focus more on the social side of Solarpunk, and which is how we can relate to other living beings in the environment. This shows a screenshot of the prototype that we have created. In our game, there will be 2D characters in a 3D world, and you'll play on Mars in a human colony that has been abandoned. You are Escropita, which is this character shown in the right-hand side, a human volunteer. Your job is to learn to talk to the Maikari. They are fungus-like intelligent beings shaped by the planet's own ecology. Maikaris are not shown in the screenshot, but we are going to talk extensively about it on the next slides. In this game, you're not trying to rebuild the old human dream of Mars. Instead, you build a new future together with the Maikaris, taking apart what the colonists left behind, listening, adapting, and giving back as much as you take. This shows the 3 characters that we have in the game. On the left, we have Maikaris. The Maikaris are living beings that you share the world with. They're not resources for you to use. Humans are not the center of the story. You can't manage the Maikaris. What you have to do is you have to earn their trust over time and ask for their help, and they can help you or they not. They have their own autonomy. Their mushroom-like form use a shifting, distorted look so that the world feels alive, strange, and beyond like what we are usually used to. In the middle, we have our character that the player will be controlling, whose name is Escropita. As I said, he's a human volunteer whose psychedelic countercultural style reflects a move away from controlling nature towards listening and giving back. And at the end we have Daffodil, a small solar-powered AI companion left behind by earlier Mars colonies. Daffodil is a reminder that old technology and new ecological futures can sit side by side. So how to play this game? Mainly what you need to do is you need to learn to communicate with the Maikaris, but not in a conventional way using a language or words. What you need to do is you need to listen to the patterns they make and answer back in the same way. As you play, you keep meeting unfamiliar ways of sensing and understanding the world. The sound in this game used is real. We record living mushrooms with a gentle, non-invasive probes, treat that data like sheet music, and play it back as MIDI through a hardware sampler to make the game's tunes. Green technology is present in our game, but rather than that being the focus, the focus of the green technology, rather than being speed or efficiency, it's tuning into others, giving back, and building relationships. The art matches this. Hand-drawn textures, what you can see in the character, and a 3D world, but with 2D characters that look handmade and tied to a living system. And our artwork is not sleek and industrial. We have 2 separate design goals, which is listed on the slide here. On the design side, we push back against elite capture, we focus on attunement, and we focus on multiple endings that is shaped by the player. And we also have some value goal, which is giving back instead of just taking, and supporting, and staying curious. based on these goals, we have set our design loop, and our design loop keeps, we use a critical play design loop method from Flanagan. The idea of this loop is games aren't just neutral entertainment. Games can make players question and rethink social, cultural, and ecological systems, and also imagine alternatives. It's a loop that we repeat. We set and design value goals that we have taken a look in the earlier slides. Then make rules and tasks that support those values or goals. Design for many playstyle, including players who try to break or subvert the game. So we have multiple endings. We have next we're planning to build a playable prototype, test it with different kinds of people, then check whether the values actually came through or not, and then revise the goals and then start the loop again. Currently, we're in the prototype phase where we have a rough, somewhat playable build of our game.
Because Acid Green draws on psychedelic aesthetics and perception, we turn to psychedelic studies to understand how these experiences are catalysts for imagining different futures. The displayed article included 31 semi-structured interviews with relevant stakeholders to capture what they imagine the hopeful future related to future psychedelics and the legality of them. And among the three competing imaginaries, the social justice one most strongly relates to our design ethos as it emphasizes decolonial transformation. As such, since games can present social imaginaries, we offer this working definition of acid green. So acid green games participate in the construction of ecological and social imaginaries, inviting players to rehearse alternative relationships between humans, technology, and the non-human world. Unlike optimistic or solutionist imaginaries, acid green foregrounds ambiguity, discomfort, and transformation as conditions for imagining futures. And we respond to Solarpunk and green game norms by contrasting acid green not as a replacement, but as a way of drawing attention to ecological entanglements. The word acid does a lot of work here as it evokes multiple meanings at once. It's chemical and corrosive, dissolving old assumptions and systems. It's psychedelic and altered perception. It's ecological with images of vivid green moss and fungal growth coming to mind. And here, acid green becomes a metaphor for games that can dissolve inherited ways of thinking about humans, technology, and nature. And what sets it apart from simply being darker solarpunk or eco-horror is the fact that it's not about replacing optimism with despair, but rather about replacing certainty with deeper ecological reckonings and questionings through the act of play. And these are just some binaries that were helpful to our thinking with this. So instead of hope, we have curiosity. Instead of sustainable technology, we're questioning technology's role. Harmony is replaced with tension and negotiation. Soft green, cozy pastoral is contrasted with lush fungal overgrown. And utopian futures are replaced with strange evolving futures, and community is expanded to include more than human community. And that's it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I wanted to applaud you before I turned the other part on. Okay. Yes, lots of applause. And again, lots of great conversations happening in the chat because everybody was really blown away by the MIDI mushroom music, basically, which is awesome. Okay, so we have some questions already in the chat and the Q&A, and if folks want to add more, they're more than welcome to. I'm just going to go through with what I'm seeing. So Joe's asking a question for Gabrielle. Have you considered taking the same approach as you're doing with this game, but with a game that celebrates unsustainable practices such as drilling for oil or building AI data centers?
I did not, but it would be interesting to do so. When we first designed Detritus, we did not intend to do that research. We were designing it with our own values, to express our own values on the question. So, but yeah, it would be interesting, and if someone is interested to do it, I encourage you to compare the result of a similar study with a game that it does not convey these what we could call transformative, eco-critical value.
Yeah, I love it. There was a lot of conversation in the Discord about this in terms of everybody was kind of blown away by the results in terms of what the actual effect of the materiality is. And it's not what we would have like when you stated your results, I was like, that's not what I thought was going to happen at all.
Yeah.
And many people in the Discord were really blown away by that. And then disappointed. I think Evan said something about like this is very telling about humanity and how we're interacting with the materialities and with the games, right? So I think that's maybe why Joe's question.
And just to make sure it was understood, because I saw a lot of comments about AI. The AI was used only for the booklets of the polluting version for research purpose only. The polluting version will never be distributed. And someone told me we could have hired an artist to make it look like AI, but I don't have this kind of budget. I literally covered every page of the booklet with big images that would have taken so much time to do, and I would never have this budget. But it was interesting, and we wanted actually to shock and frustrate the people who play the game, and I was shocked at how much they reacted to this specifically and not to the plastic. The plastic is fine, but don't use AI.
Yeah.
Right? So that's very interesting to us. And the fact that they noticed ChatGPT in the credits, even before we pinpointed it, we didn't say anything about it, and they saw it while they didn't even read the text on the cards. So it says a lot about how young people, and especially young people in game design, are frustrated by the use of AI to kind of replace their future job somehow.
Yeah. No, I think, and that honestly gives me hope, and it makes me happy that that was the reaction. Although I am surprised by the vehemence in some sense. But I would be curious if they were especially, so I'm wondering if it's an audience thing in terms of like these students are thinking specifically about the future of game design and like their own careers, like you were mentioning, or whether it was in direct relationship to the theme and the ecological theme, because we know that how much water AI takes up and all those kinds of things, right? All the kinds of ecological effects of it. So I'm wondering, like, I think that's where Joe's question is coming from in terms of like parsing that out more.
Yeah, probably a mix of both, but
yeah,
for
sure.
It's a qualitative research. The results cannot be generalized to any other games, and it's a research where we can only elaborate hypothesis. So that's it.
Yeah. No, well, thank you. And I'm glad we address the AI elephant in the Discord chat. Thank you. Okay, moving on to other questions. A question for the Ecorevolutionary TTRPG team. How do the games that you analyze deal with different types of violence? So violence against people or living beings versus violence against property. This is an important distinction maybe in the revolutionary theory and strategy.
Do you want to pick that up, Annie?
Yeah, why not? So I think focusing on Blades in the Dark specifically, because this is the one that both Zoheb and I have a lot of familiarity with. Blades in the Dark specifically awards heat for killing people or living beings, wherein heat is something you don't want to get. It represents negative attention towards you and your crew. It's the law, and it's how other factions view you negatively. And indeed, the ghost field in Blades is also a really important concept of things hanging around afterwards and affecting your crew after the fact of their death. In terms of property, all three of the games we kind of looked at, really, when we look through the violence chapters, it's about damage to people and people and living things, rather than damage against property. I think one thing I would like to note in Ecomofos is that in one of the sidebars it talks about environmental hazards. and also about morale done to people in terms of people. So I think there's a really interesting way you as a GM could consider how to intersect damage against property with causing environmental hazards later on in terms of that clever solution that OSR games tend to want players to think about doing rather than mechanical buttons they can press, and also about affecting morale of people around them. So, for example, prepping a situation by daubing graffiti over an environment to make people turn tail and flee would be a really interesting idea to pursue, in that although there's nothing in concrete that says this is something you can do.
Interesting. So I will say the other thing about this question of violence I really like that got brought up, and it's tying into as I was thinking about all of these different talks, it's tying into our keynote speakers talk earlier about like how we're defining cozy, right? And how does cozy fit into all of these different conversations? Just because a lot of thinking about cozy is kind of that eschewing violence, right? Dealing with violence in a different way. So I was curious for yours if you like, obviously that wasn't something maybe on your mind, but if you had to think about like, so 10% of the games that you were looking at were eco, 10% were revolutionary. I'm wondering of that big bundle and within those categories, how many you would think of having a cozy aesthetic, just because like when you showed aside from like the axolotl, right? But it's an axolotl with a gun, right? None of them, none of the immediate ones screamed that vibe to me. So I was just curious, and it kind of ties into like Mateo's question about like how we're dealing with violence.
Yeah, Zoheb, do you want to take that because you did the majority of the bundle?
Yeah, I'd say that generally speaking, especially for the ecological games, which I think the question is a bit more focused on. Um, yeah, I'd say like generally speaking, ecology is seen like more cozily. A lot of them were kind of like about being an animal, kind of like just exploring the natural world as an animal, as a mushroom guy, for example, or thinking about flowers and so on. So a lot of it is like much more gentle. Um, and I think like intentionally try to like code for things that were also like, here's a monster. But we kind of like are presented with an animal and it is a monster and its role in the world and role in the game would be something that does violence or which you do violence to, but it is still an animal. So we're still thinking about it and thinking about one. So but that also kind of felt transgressive, and also I wasn't sure if I should categorize them in that way. Like, is that meant to be ecological? Like, that's me making a judgment and so on. Because again, like, it does seem to me like unless we have, I think, yeah, Alan was talking about the game Predators or basically like sort of like games where you have the food chain and so on. You're each building a competitive species in the food chain, and you kind of like prey on each other and so on. Unless there's a game that kind of like is simulating those dynamics, I don't think violence necessarily generally enters our understanding of what ecology is. But at the same time, there is also an unspoken violence, I think, because so many games, I think that we saw that kind of like were thinking about ecology. We're also thinking about it in the context of the absence of the human. Either the human beings have been somehow forcibly removed, or environments where human beings would normally would be, but they are not there, which poses the questions of what happened to them to remove them, or straightforwardly post-apocalyptic games. Right. I think, for example, Kathleen and Samin were also talking about Terra Nil, for example, where there is the violence of the post-apocalypse. So something happened, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, just general thoughts.
Yeah, no, I love it. That's what we're here for. And honestly, thinking this question of violence, again, thank you, Mateo, for asking this question, or getting us thinking about that topic. I want to pivot real quick to Michael's talk, just because I don't think you got to say everything you wanted to say, Michael, and so I want to give you that chance in case there's more that you want to say. But two, one of the things I was struck upon, or struck by in your talk was thinking about this, that the Rosenberg's game is thinking about the cooperation between humans and animals. And I was struck by that idea because within there is the question of consent, and animals can't give consent, right? Which leads me to what Zoheb was saying about like this unspoken violence, right? This kind of violence that we're not talking about or that we're just kind of assuming. So I'm just kind of rambling at this point, but I feel like there's some things there in terms of where consent is in this conversation. But Michael, anything else you want to say about
Thanks a
Atiwa?
lot for this question. It's really, it ties into the silent violence, of course, but then consent is a human thing. And I think we should ask ourselves whether animals have ability to consent. In the game and in actual practice, the bats just have a place to stay where they are safe. So this can be seen as a kind of consent in the actual practice done in Ghana. They just want to live somewhere and somewhere where there are no predators that could harm them. So sharing your home them is a way of just giving them a choice whether to live there or not. So this is something that I think can be interpreted this way, especially that on the player's tableau there are places outside of people's homes that the bats can stay, but there will be less and less bats. So this is something that I think this game tries to present, tries to make us aware of, that when we expand the social network, that would include non-human beings, the question of consent is more difficult. This is something Latour writes about, that we have to take into account the interest of non-humans, but they cannot speak in this broadened democracy. So there has to be someone who votes for them, who gives them voice, for example. And for Latour, it is usually scientists who try to interpret the intent of non-human beings in this broader network. So this is something that I think is very philosophically problematic and ethically problematic. And it still is domesticating, so it can be read as violent.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
so, so I think that it is ethically not black and white, and it comes to the whole game because after all, the players want to have as many victory points as it is possible.
Of
So when
course we
I've
do.
seen the playthroughs of people, like at the beginning, they want to avoid polluting the terrain as much as possible because it's ethically icky. The game tells them it's not good. But after when the game ends, they just want to have as much points as it is possible. And this capitalist greed that the game tries to criticize is still present
Yeah,
in the mechanics of the game. And other problematic thing in this game is that the bats have voice. The bats are cooperating with humans, but the goats or wild boars have no agency in the game. They are just resources that are fed upon by humans.
yeah.
So this game tries to subvert some hegemonic ideologies about ecosystems, about nature, but fails in a lot of accounts. That's what I wanted to say, but I was afraid of the time constraint.
No, you're
Thanks
good.
a lot.
Yeah. No, I'm glad that we got there. You were fine on time before, but I'm also glad that we got to have that conversation because I think you were nudging towards it, and lots of people in the chat were nudging towards it. So I'm glad we got to state it outright. And yeah, I'm glad that you elaborate. I haven't this like I've played a lot of Juve games, but I haven't played this one before. So having a little bit more understanding of the mechanics of it and what's happening in the game in relationship to the cooperation between the animals and the humans is very useful. And I think is a nice segue to a bunch of other questions that we have with thinking about like our acid green games. One of the things that you all said was that a lot of these games are thinking more about like these smaller acts of connection. And so we have a few questions for the Solarpunk team, which is thinking about, let's see, so one, where do I want to start? Okay, so one is Solarpunk asking us to think utopian. And by that, do we mean that it's encouraging us to to think more utopian, or is that like the thing says, or is that to say this is all fine? So I'm trying to think of like what's the relationship between solar punk and utopian? And then thinking about what are there any other types of punk subgenres that you all considered for the game before settling on solar punk? And
Yeah, I'll take a swing at this.
Yeah, go for it.
So the relationship between solar punk and utopianism is rather fraught. Some people advocate for a more protopian approach to solar punk, where it's like doing active steps now to get to some better place, while other folks like within like feminist utopianism studies, kind of still strive for a particular ideal or imagine a wouldn't this be a great situation as a way to sort of have a big picture, little steps approach moving forward. A lot of solar punk, something that Tokey and I were thinking about when we were like exploring solar punk is that there's all these like splendid solar punk imagery of like plants being used and technology being used in this very harmonious way, but it's in a very like bespoke, cutesy, not very systemic, challenging way. It's almost cozy adjacent and soothing to sort of see these pictures of like hopeful relationships between technology and nature. And there wasn't a ton of, you can't really like use technology to tinker your way towards utopianism. And instead you need to sort of think about the deeper like social connections that are responsible for that kind of change. So we specifically wanted to like critique solar punk in the way that it's already being sort of greenwashed in the game spaces, if that makes sense
Yeah,
as an answer.
absolutely.
Tokey, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you have perfectly framed that. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay, so then I think Daniel is thinking that maybe Mark Fisher's Acid Communism might be a useful resource for you. Or I'll phrase it that way. And then,
Thank you for that.
yeah.
Yeah, it was super helpful. Tokey and I, our main like theoretical inspiration, which we didn't have a ton of time to like get into because we had to talk about our game and then this like model that we're thinking about. But we were really inspired by more indigenous perspectives from people like Suzanne Kite and feminist utopian thinkers like Ruth Levitas. But I think Mark Fisher's work would be a wonderful thing to include in our related work. So thank you for the recommendation.
Yeah, thank you.
That's what we love about Generation Analog. Like we're just pooling resources, right? Everybody, no, not everybody can read everything or know everything, and that's why we do this because it can be very helpful. Michael, you have another question from Daniel. I'm just gonna do what Ed's been very helpfully doing for me behind the scenes. So the question is, how does Latour use the term biopolitics? Daniel's thinking about Foucault's use of the term and its post-colonial adaptation into necropolitics. So we're thinking about how are we defining that?
Yes, I was writing my answer in the
Oh, I'm
chat.
sorry,
So,
Michael.
so it would be quicker and better to just address it here. So Latour himself doesn't use the term biopolitics. He is a sociologist who tries to think of sociality outside of human field. So he proposes this concept of networks or social networks in which human and non-humans influence each other. That's why he has written a very prominent book called The Politics of Nature. What I am trying to do in my research is to connect this notion of politics of nature with biopolitics, because usually in board and card games, which I'm researching, the players are tasked with governing life. And this is biopolitical, the way Foucault defines biopolitics. But I try to move from Foucault's notion towards more recent interpretation of biopolitics, especially Esposito, because they are more useful to describe ecosystems, and they are used to describe ecosystems. And but the biopolitics of member is also very helpful. I actually have been doing some research on war games about ecosystems, and necropolitics is really useful there. So I hope that this answers the Daniel's question.
Well, it does for me, Michael, so I appreciate it. I don't know, I can't speak for Daniel. Are there we have just a few more minutes. Are there any other questions? Gabrielle, I saw that Jason Cox had asked a question before, but you very kindly typed an answer. Do you want to address that big time, with everybody, or are you okay with that?
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me. Can you read it? Yeah.
Yes, of course. Yeah,
Oh,
sorry.
yeah.
Jason asked, do you think the positive post-survey descriptions of the eco-unfriendly version was a justification for having enjoyed the game or its aesthetics?
Yeah, so I answered that my feeling after reading all the transcription of the conversation during the gaming session and the focus group is that the participants were really at ease, they were transparent, and they were self-critical, they were not shy of admitting their own mistakes. So it's the feeling that I have is no, they did not try to justify themselves. But as I said, it's hard to know what's going on in their head. That's a limit of focus group and interviews, is that you cannot penetrate in people's brain, and so we can just interpret the discussion that have been said, the words that have been said.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. But I do think I think acknowledging that or thinking through that in terms of whatever, right, we can't interpret or we can't know exactly why they might feel a certain way if they're not explicitly stating it, right?
But I didn't feel that people were on the defensive.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, I don't think so.
Awesome.
I think they just didn't see it. They just didn't see it.
Yeah. But I think that, even acknowledging that they didn't see it could be fruitful for the discussion as well, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Kathleen and Samin, did we answer the question about other types of punk subgenres? I've been trying to focus on a bunch of different things.
No.
Okay, yeah, let's do it. Sorry.
Yeah. we very much wanted to do it about Solarpunk because it's this emerging genre that's starting to trickle into game spaces out of the literary space. So it was a very targeted genre choice, but it's a wonderful, there's so many cool punk genres happening right now. So that would be interesting to see other people work on other parts of that too.
So I'll flip this question and just ask, were there other types of cli-fi that you were interested in besides the Solarpunk? Just because cli-fi is also kind of fairly broad.
Yeah, I actually, while we're working on this paper together, Tokey and I in this game, I'm teaching a Solarpunk ARG class where I'm having students build an ARG on our campus, and some of the things that they're reading in there are short stories from this collection of climate dystopian texts. I can share it. I don't have the name on it right now, but it's like publicly accessible, and there are these amazing stories from all these different perspectives about like what a Solarpunk feature could look like. So I'm just gonna look for that now, I think.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, no, I'm so glad that
Cool.
we asked this question because um the yeah, no, I love Cli-Fi a lot. And yes, I love Alendra's conversation about a Psalm for the Wild build would be amazing. Yes, I want a game version of that, please. I can't believe that there isn't one yet, or at least a TTRPG of it. So, all right, we are just about out of time. I want to thank all of our wonderful panelists for all of their amazing thoughts and contributions, and we will keep the conversations going. Yes, one last round of applause. I saw one little uh, hand wave. This was wonderful. And then we will be back here at 4:30 for Green Histories. So we're going from the environment to history. We'll see you all then. Thank you so much.